Hi, I'm Keanna Faircloth, host of Artimacy podcast, and I am so excited to have a conversation with Kemp Powers, one of the co-directors of the movie Soul. Of course, Soul will be exhibited at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem through the end of December. It's been extended, and Kemp Powers has brought a very, very unique experience to the film in him growing up in Brooklyn and had his connection to jazz music and how he worked with the artistic director of National Jazz Museum, Mr. Jon Batiste, on this very special film. So here's our conversation. All right. Hi, Kemp.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I'm so glad you decided to do this at this hour. I can't tell you how much I
Sure.
appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Yeah, it's all about scheduling these days because I'm in production, so it's a
I
little
know.
crazy.
I know you got a lot going on.
Yes.
All right, well, let's get started. Kemp Powers is a playwright, producer, director, screenwriter, and I think one of the most important things to note is that he is an alum of the illustrious Howard University. HU?
Yes. You know.
You're supposed to say,
I did.
HU?
I know. I'm sorry. It's 7 in the morning. So
Well, welcome, Kemp. I'm
thank,
so excited to talk to you here today.
thanks you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. It's pretty great. I mean, uh, when we did this movie, of course there were questions like, are people going to want to go on this journey, considering the subject matter? And it's been really reassuring and exciting to see how the film connected with so many different people. So
Indeed.
I'm
And
really
that
happy to be
film,
here.
of course, being Soul, which you were the co-director of, along with two amazing folks, Peter Docter and Mike Jones.
Yeah, right. We
And
we co-wrote it. Yes, me and Pete. I was co-director with Pete and co-screenwriter with Pete and Mike Jones.
ah, and you brought something very, very important to this film, not only your own personal experience, but of course, growing up as well in New York and Joe Gardner being a musician and teacher and just hustling, trying to make it. You brought something very authentic to this film. So let's start there. Let's start with how you brought your personal experience to Soul, because I know that I read somewhere that that conversation that Joe Gardner actually has with his mom, Joe Gardner, voiced by Jamie Foxx, and the mom by Felicia Rashad, who coincidentally now is the Dean of Fine Arts at Howard University,
Oh, right,
sidebar.
right, right.
That was a conversation that you kind of had that was similar to one that you had with your mother.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting because I always saw Soul primarily as an opportunity to kind of show what the artist's journey feels like. And coincidentally, like that was a journey I was on myself personally at the time that I got invited up to Pixar, and got to work on this film. I mean, I turn I turned 49 years old this year. And when I started on Soul, I was in my mid 40s, and I had been just grinding for decades, working on these creative pursuits that, look, a lot of the people around me, were like, I think the expiration date is past. And I was at this point where I was just going on passion alone. Like passion was the thing that kept me writing. And I thought like this film was a wonderful opportunity to kind of go on that journey. And I think the scene with Joe and his mother I think that was the first scene I started working on as a writer when I first came onto the film, because it felt absolutely natural. Like, what should this guy be saying to his mom? And it's like, boy, I more than know how this conversation should be going, because you have these conversations with your parents. You're getting up into middle age, and you have kids of your own, in my case, and you still kind of feel like, man, shouldn't I be a little bit more stable? Now, full disclosure, writing creatively is a second career. I was a journalist for like almost 2 decades, but I was always doing these creative pursuits on the side, similar to Joe, who had
Yes.
become a teacher and was always doing his creative pursuits on the side. And you're always looking for that opportunity to just throw yourself into it 100%. So there were so many surreal parallels, and I mined a lot of my personal experience all throughout the film. And that's another thing that's been really awesome and encouraging, is that, whenever I encounter professional artists, whether it be musicians or actors or filmmakers, who tell me how much that film spoke to how they feel as a working artist. I mean, I think another
Yes.
really powerful element of that is when Joe gets what he wants, gets his dream, and he's still himself. You know what I mean? There's this idea that you get to the mountaintop, so to speak, and all your problems get washed away, and it
Right.
fixes everything. And the reality of it is that you're still just a person trying to navigate their way through the world, whether you're famous or not famous, whether you're successful or not successful. So I know these are some pretty heady ideas for a kids movie. At least some people thought they were, but I think kids got it, and kids loved it. And it's amazing to see how the film landed and resonated with different ages in different ways. I have a son who's about to go and start college next week. He's 18 years old.
Wow.
And for college age kids who are literally in that point in their life where they're going like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. What should I be doing? It resonated with them. It was just so great for really younger kids. The musical element of it really kind of jumped off the screen at them. So this idea that like jazz was a genre that really, really young kids might not connect to was immediately disproven, because you saw young kids leaning in for every single performance. I mean, it was just so, man, that was so satisfying.
Yeah. I remember sitting and watching it with my niece, who I think at the time was 9,
Hmm.
and me feeling so connected, and like this film was talking to me. Like, it was so relatable in that, you have that 9 to 5 hustle, but you're still, like you mentioned, trying to make it work
Right.
creatively. Your passion, you're trying to engage that in order to feel alive. And
Yes.
my question to you is, at what point did you realize that you wanted to dive in full force into your passion? Because, like you said, you had a career of two
Yes.
decades as a reporter,
Yes.
editor in journalism.
Yes. Yeah. I think it was God, what is it, 2022? I guess it was about seven now or 8 years ago.
Wow.
Where that hobby that I've been doing on weekends was finally starting to get some notice. I was finally starting to get some work out into the world. And I kind of had to make a decision, because I was getting enough success that people wanted more from me. This was as a playwright, and I kind of had to make a decision, because I couldn't commit to that time while still doing my quote unquote day job. So for me, what that meant is um, deciding to go all in. And I was very, very lucky, because the last full-time journalism job that I got laid off. And when I got laid off, I got like severance pay. I had like stocks that were vested, and all
Wow.
that money together equaled like about a year and a half, 2 year salary. Now, normally what you would do in that situation is you go right into another job, and you squirrel that away. And I said to myself, I was like, I have a play out. It's getting good reviews. I have agents. I have the infrastructure to really go all in on this artist thing, but I can't do that while also doing a 9 to 5 job. I have enough money to float myself for about 18 months. And this is it. I believe I was 40 years old at the time. I was 40 years old. So I had just turned 40. I said, okay, this is it.
Big
These are the
moment.
last these are the last 2 years you have to give this creative writing thing a go. If at the end of the 2 years, fully committed 2 years, this is the only thing you do. If it doesn't work out, then we call it, walk away, be happy knowing you gave it the real college try. And I swear it was like month 16 or 17 of that 2 year window that things finally kind of started clicking.
Wow. Now, were
So
you at the point where you were like, all right, maybe I shouldn't do that?
absolutely, I was filled with self-doubt. I was really, again, I was in the place that Joe Gardner was in
Wow.
at that time. That's why I said, for me, when you do films, when you do theater, films, anything, television, there's structure, there's story math, there's like because of this, that. One of the things I loved about Soul was we had our structure, we had our story math, but the entire filmmaking process was as much about emotion and feeling. What does this make me feel? Does it is it eliciting the correct emotion? And that was something we always talked about. Every time we went back, because it's an iterative process where you do things and then you do them again, then you do them again. Sometimes it was sound, but it didn't make me feel, you know?
Mm,
And the only way I was going to feel something is if it felt authentic to that moment. And again, because I was so close to it at the time, um, I really had a very quick and easy point of reference in terms of a lot of the steps that these characters were going through in the film.
wow, incredible. You know that moment in the movie when Joe Gardner falls into the manhole?
Mhm.
What was your manhole experience? Or did you have one? Do you feel
Yeah,
like you
I did. I absolutely did have a manhole experience. My manhole experience was I had a play that I'd written that was finally getting its first big production at a regional theater in Baltimore at Center Stage in Baltimore. And I got sick a couple of days before opening night and ended up in the hospital with a
wow.
and I could have died. Like I was in the hospital for 8 or 9 days, and I didn't know if I was going to get out. I missed my own opening night. I was
Wow.
up the block at a hospital in Baltimore, and my loved ones came to see me in the hospital. I was and I remember it started snowing outside, and I was just laying there in pain, going like, if I get out of here, if I actually make it out of this hospital bed, um, that's it. Like I am all in. I'm going to really try to pursue this thing. So I had an apples to apples kind of like manhole experience for me. And
Wow.
yeah, yeah, it was real. It was really something where it was like a quite literally a brush with death. Um the evening before what should have been like the biggest moment of my creative career, and I missed it because I was trying not to die. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's my experience.
Now, that is so uncanny. Now, what had that already been written in Soul? That
Yes, the
scene?
the him dying was already in the even in the early draft, because the whole point, think about it, it's
Wow.
Soul. It's about a guy who finally gets the big break he's been waiting for, and on the day he gets his big break, he dies. Like that was always the central conceit, but that was why it's connected to me. You know what I mean? Like I when Pete first invited me up and kind of broke down an early reel of the story. This is like 2D storyboards. It's not even a full movie. It's like 40 minutes with scratch acting. One of the things that was always there was he auditions, he gets the job, goes outside, and falls down the manhole and dies. That was the one thing that was there already. And that was actually the thing that made me say, oh man, this is a movie I gotta work on. I gotta help make,
Wow.
because that really that really resonates.
Wow. Incredible. So at the time when Pete Doctor called you, you were a writer for Star Trek at the moment?
I had already finished on Star Trek, and I had just wrapped up working a different writer's room. I was actually in between TV jobs. And I
Oh,
had
so
and
you had time.
yes, yes, yes.
So that completely like fell in line. It seems like everything fell in line for you
The
too.
timing was it was really uncanny. Like if he would have called 4 weeks before, I wouldn't have been available. And if he would have called 4 weeks later, I probably wouldn't have been available. I would have been moved on to the next TV show where I wouldn't have been able to break away and work on it. The timing was really impeccable.
That is such that is amazing because you like you said, we're at the point where you're feeling like, all right, well, maybe I should just, call it quits. But things seem to happen in a manner, in a time frame where it's really just supposed to happen. Like
Yes. And I tell people, if I would have had that these specific opportunities and I should say that success 15, 20 years earlier, I don't think it would have gone the same. I don't think
Mm.
I was actually ready for it. I grew a lot in these years as a human being, and my worldview changed, and my creative worldview changed. And it's funny, like the timing, when I say the timing, it wasn't just between jobs, it was like the timing was perfect for where I was in my life. Like I remember when shortly after I got the job, Pete said that like he'd gone to the development team and said, we're looking for writers. And they were like, well, what kind of writers? And they were like, and he said, it would be great if there was someone who really related to this character. I mean, is it possible to get a middle-aged, like 40 something, black man who knows jazz, who's from New York? And they're like, well, that person's not out there. And lo and behold, I kind of like showed up, like came walking through the door, like, hey, what's going on in here? And was like to the point where when they walked in and showed me the character design for Joe Gardner, everyone kind of looked at Joe Gardner and looked at me
Right.
and said, it kind of looks like this guy.
Same head shape.
Yeah, I mean, it was trippy. It was really kind of trippy. Down to like the salt and pepper. I mean, you can't see it, but at the time I had a mustache. So it was really bizarre to kind of walk in and just go and go like, oh yeah, I understand this guy. And it was it was bizarre. It was uncanny.
Wow. So was it instant? They were like, all right, we need you right away.
Well, I mean, you would have to ask him for that, but yeah, I mean, I flew up. They showed me what they had. We had a really great conversation. I basically told them the things that I would want to pursue, the things that I would want to do. Had a really nice conversation. I flew back down to Los Angeles. A few days later, they were like, they want you to come back. They want you to meet the whole team because I'm assuming they were talking to lots of people. I flew back up. I talked to everyone who was the key people who are involved in the film at the time, and then they asked me to come on board. And again, initially, I thought it was going to be a very short, like, oh, I'm going to come up as a writer, work on this for a couple of months, and then go on my way. But it just turned into something so much bigger really quickly. So a few months turned into several years. Helping out with the writing turned into not just writing, but co-directing and helping in every, and kind of like really having a great partnership with everyone up there. So it was, this whole thing, that whole experience, nothing was really planned. It just kind of, I was just there and just putting my heart and soul, no pun intended, into this film from the first day I walked through the door.
Yeah. I mean, it couldn't have been more perfect. I mean, born in Brooklyn, love of jazz. Let's delve into that love of
Sure.
jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I read that your son's name is actually
Yeah,
Mingus.
I named him after Charles Mingus. One of
So
my
cool.
two favorite jazz music. Well, three: Mingus,
You three.
Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk.
Nice.
Those are my big three.
Nice
I,
choices. You
I
got your
used to
sax
play.
player.
I used to play saxophone in
Oh,
a
you
jazz
did?
band. Yes, yes, in a jazz band in junior high school, and going into high school. And Giant Steps was always one of those songs where you're just like you want so bad to be able to play that, So you're struggling through it. So
Yeah. Trying to
Coltrane,
figure out those changes. Like,
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, jazz was always a huge part of my life. Plus, I'm of that age when obviously hip hop being in New York was like the soundtrack to your life, and
right.
90s hip hop was heavily
The
about sampling
samples.
jazz. So, you know what I mean? Like, so it was one of those things where like a lot of my favorite music, I could tell you, like, oh, because that was a time when you have to clear samples. So you start being able to find out what everyone is sampling, and that opened up and expanded it and really made you appreciate artists like Herbie Hancock. You know what I mean? Who
Yes.
the people who hip hop artists will go to again and again and again to sample. So I also credit a lot of my my hip hop history in the 90s of really kind of pointing me towards, because that was the jazziest era of hip hop.
Hip hop. It was. So
Yeah.
you were clearly reading the liner notes.
Yeah. So I remember because when I first early on in soul, because Pete obviously is a huge fan of jazz as well. But I think his interests were a little bit of a different era of jazz. And of course he loved Count Basie. I love Count Basie too. But the whole hip hop jazz connection, I don't think he was as familiar with. So I did like a little show and tell presentation for Pete,
I love that.
the Mike, our producer, our editor, where I literally pulled together this whole presentation and like for an hour played them all this music and the jazz that the music was derived from, and then played a lot more modern jazz artists like Robert Glasper and
Yes.
Kamasi Washington and stuff like that. I basically did like a presentation on like the evolution of jazz and how
Yes.
it related to the Black community specifically. And I
Yes.
think that was really, it was fun. It was like, oh no kid. And so yeah,
So you
that was
blew
really my
minds
focus.
basically with
Yeah,
this.
yeah. And I mean, that's why a lot of the needle drop music that you hear when it's not original compositions from Jon Batiste, it's the stuff from my age group. You hear Tribe, you
Yeah.
hear Erica Badu, you hear well, Cody Chestnut. You know what I mean? It's that kind of Soulquarians, vibe. Of course you have
Yeah.
Questlove, who actually ended up both in the movie and like a consultant. So those were all parts of that kind of like I said, I'm biased. I'm of a certain age. So jazz to me doesn't just mean, bebop. It doesn't just mean, it also means like jazz as it relates to hip hop, hip hop in New York. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And hip hop and black culture in New York and how that would impact people. So, Joe being who he is one thing, but it's like, okay, he goes into Dez's barbershop. That's the thing. It's like you go into a barbershop, the music is going to reflect the taste of the barber. So
Right.
if Dez is of a certain age, he's going to be playing certain music. He's not going to be playing like, oh, this is what's hot right now. He's going to play what makes him feel good, what makes him feel comfortable. And at that age, it's going to be, these types of music.
Yeah.
Sorry
And
for
that's
rambling a
another
bit. But
experience too, like specific to, the Black culture is the whole barbershop
Mhm.
experience and the fact that that was, you know, put in the movie, I felt like made it that much more relatable
Yeah,
for
I
Black
mean,
people as well.
that was one of the earliest things that I brought up because that scene wasn't, I mean, it was one of many scenes that wasn't in the film, but one of the things that
Ah,
I was struggling with was I said, look, I talked to Pete about it. I said, it's interesting because this guy's a black man living in New York. And I said, it's impossible to be black in a city like New York. And no matter what neighborhood you happen to live in, you have to pass through black spaces. You have to pass through black spaces to just get the
mm,
things that we need, something as simple as a haircut.
mm,
So I don't know if you noticed, but geographically, Joe lives in what would technically be like Jackson Heights, Queens, which is not a
ah,
black neighborhood. It's more Asian and Middle Eastern. So he rides the 7 train. Like that's how hardcore we were. It was like we want to see he needs to be in the right geographic place. And I
ah,
lived very brief. I lived for a while in Queens and Woodside, which is the next neighborhood over from Jackson Heights. So again, I'm kind of like putting my experience in there. So it's like,
right.
well, Joe is living in Jackson Heights or Woodside, and he wants to get a haircut. He's going to have to go to a black neighborhood to get that haircut, which is
Right.
so it was like you got to at least pass through these black spaces. And I said, there's no blacker space than a barbershop. So, of course, that was the emotion that's motivating it, but then you have to make it work for the story, which is that's the journey you go on. It's like you can't just be like, okay, and now he's just going to a barbershop because it's like it has to be a part of the story. What can he learn? Who's he going to interact with? And that's when the idea I came up with the idea of the barber des, because the interesting thing about a barber is in many cases the barber is the person that you have the longest relationship with outside of your like significant other. It's someone when you find
Wow.
someone good, whether it's a barber or a hairdresser, it's not uncommon for you to
Right.
stick with that person for years or maybe even decades. So I love this idea that like here's a guy who Joe might even call a friend because he sees him all the time. But then in the course of the story, we realize that it's been a one-sided friendship and he really doesn't know anything about this person. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, my barber is always listening to me,
Right.
but I don't really ever ask him anything about himself. And if I did, I can maybe learn a lesson, learn something new. The lesson that challenges Joe in the film is, of course, this idea of what a person is meant to do and their passion. And, you know, Joe always assumed that Des the barber, because he's so good at his job and because he seems to love it so much, this is what he always dreamed of doing and wanted to do, being an
Right.
entrepreneur, being a business owner. And when he finds out, because of the swap in 22 and all that, is that Des wanted to be a veterinarian, you know, and that wasn't his dream. Quite the opposite. Because of his daughter's health, he had to give up on that and do something different. But then that became the thing he loved. That became the thing that was fulfilling. Because that's one of the most complicated things about this film, Soul, is that you want to make sure that everyone, no matter what their walk of life, everyone in the audience feels represented. It shouldn't be this thing where it's like, pursue your dream. And if you pursue your dream and get it, you'll be happy. But if you don't, then you're going to be depressed. It's like, no, there are people who don't know what they want to do, and they can still find satisfaction. They can still find joy and happiness in their lives. In many cases, that's our parents who who came from a generation where they can't go out and say they want to make movies. So it's like, it was really important to validate the whole spectrum of life and the choices that we make, or the things that are taken out of that are outside of our choice, you know? So that was a really important scene for me. And I
Yeah.
think it was an important scene for the movie overall.
There were so many relatable points in this movie, so many, too many for me to even name right now. But I recently had a conversation with the man who, I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart right now. The man who Joe Gardner, the teacher who Joe Gardner
You mean
sort of,
Dr. Archer?
yes, Dr.
Okay, okay,
Archer, Dr.
okay.
Peter Archer. I want to talk a little bit about how, or did you have a hand in finding him, Dr. Gardner, and how that selection was made and your interaction with Dr. Archer over Joe Gardner?
No, Dr. Archer was someone they had spoken to earlier on in the
Okay.
process. So I've met him. We had an event or two where we brought out educators and artists, and that's where I met Dr. Archer at Pixar, but I couldn't answer in terms of how they went about, you know, finding this teacher. I know that they made an effort to speak to educators and music teachers both in New York as well as in Oakland, because Pixar is next to Oakland. So we had a whole bunch of folks that came in, and Dr. Archer was great. Yeah, I met him when he came to Pixar.
Yeah. Also, of course, our artistic director at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, Jon Batiste, of course, he's the guy who plays the piano.
That's right.
And the way he has taken off.
I know. Crazy, huh? Well, not crazy. He should have. Like,
I
exactly.
mean, it's timely, of course, but
Yeah.
Soul certainly has been such a springboard for Jon. I want to talk about your working relationship with Jon Batiste, and I'm really curious to know because Joe Gardner's hands seem to look a lot like Jon's.
Yes, Joe Gardner's hands. Well, for people to understand, I mean, this is an animated film. So animated films and animation, you don't do mocap. You don't put little dots on people and
Oh,
then
that's called, what is it called?
mocap, motion capture.
Ah,
Animation means that animators are literally moving and animating every character on their own. But in the case of Joe Gardner, it was really important that a lot of times when you see characters doing things like playing music, they make it a point to move away from or not show the details of their hands in the shot. And we thought it would be really exciting to focus on the hands of Joe Gardner so that when he's playing, you see that virtuoso movement. So when Jon came on board to do the music, when he would play the tracks, we would have all these cameras set up focusing on him and specifically focusing on his hands. And that became the reference images that our animators used to animate Joe Gardner's performance. So we would always jokingly say that Joe Gardner, his his voice was Jamie Foxx and his hands are Jon Batiste. Because, Jon is literally playing the music that we're animating to, and we're animating to his physical performance. Because,
Right.
as we know, every piano player, period, let alone jazz player, they have a different way of playing. If, like I said, I'm a fan of Thelonious Monk, and he kind of has that stiff finger thing where he's kind of banging, and Jon has these very long fingers, so his movement is unique to him, and it's quite beautiful to see him perform. And Jon talks a little bit about the like playing at home versus playing when there's an audience, because I think he said like the artist is aware that there
Yeah.
has to be bigger flourishes when you're playing in front of an audience. And so he did that, and yeah, his hands really were ended up being Joe Gardner's hands. And I think the end results are pretty phenomenal myself.
Indeed, they are, certainly. And the other musicians around Joe, I mean, Tia Fuller on
Yeah.
saxophone.
Jon pulled that whole crew together. And what I love is that, we showed him the character designs, and he made it a point to match the characters to the players that he recruited.
Wow.
So a black woman playing saxophone, an Asian woman playing bass, like a black man on drums and him on piano. So it was really, really cool to sit in and work with him on those sessions and see the other fabulous musicians that he brought in to really execute that vision. It's one of those things when early on in the process we're using music cues, because the film is still in 2D storyboards,
Mhm.
and because of that, you just use whatever jazz you pull off. But at a certain point, your artist, your composer and artist has to come in and actually do the music that's going to be in the film, because that's what we're going to be animating to. And of course, we're pulling jazz samples, and these are like from some of the greatest songs you've ever heard. And so you go like, wow, I really hope that Jon and his musicians can deliver, and the experience doesn't change when we go to our original music. And I have to say, in this instance, going to the original music elevated everything.
Wow.
You know what I mean? It's like, oh man, this is even better. I'm even more excited. It's making me feel better. It's actually elevating the emotion of every one of these scenes.
Wow, that's so interesting because basically you had to improvise until Jon came in and
Yes.
actually, wow,
That's
interesting.
how it works. Yes, we use we select music cues. Our editor and us, we all pick music cues. And so when in the early versions of the film, during the performance, you would recognize songs. It'd be like, oh, that's a so and so song, and it's just, and so it's helping us get into the mood. But then at a certain point, it's time to animate it, and it's like, okay, now it has to be the song he's actually playing, and that was when it became,
Mm.
Jon's songs.
I want to delve into that idea of, improvisation. Of course, jazz is improvisation. It's based on a feeling. And it seems like the way you've moved through your life and career has completely been, that of improvisation.
Yes, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, it's so funny. Like I'm ridiculously busy right now, but something that if someone asked me, what are you going to be doing 12 months from now? I don't have an answer, and I don't ever want to have an answer. You
Wow.
know what I mean? I want to get to the end of a project and then decide on what the next project is going to be. Because I acknowledge, like, I'm in a very, very privileged position. The works that I've done with Soul, and I had another film come out that I wrote the same year called One Night in Miami, and they were both really, really well received. So it
And
put
you
me,
wrote that, and you were
yes,
sort of competing against yourself,
yes,
which I
literally,
didn't realize. I did
yeah.
not put that together.
Yes, I was competing against myself and as a writer. So
That is
yeah,
dope.
it was really a unique kind of situation to be in as a creative, to on Monday have like no one know who you are, and on Friday it feels like everyone's watching your work. You,
Right.
you know what I mean? So it really did feel like how Joe felt, where it was just like, oh man, so now what am I supposed to do? And for me, it's like I threw myself right back into the next thing. But when you have some success in doing these things, people want to like line up work so that you're just busy forever. And it's like, no, I don't, I want to finish the thing that I'm excited about and then go out and find something else to become excited about. And I think that probably speaks to that in improvisational nature. I mean, I guess as an artist, I kind of like the high risk, high reward life is the best way to put it. You know, it's not about the safe bets. It's about the things that make me feel something a lot, make me feel a lot. And for Soul, that was the best version of that, where it's just like, okay, either this is going to really connect with people, or people are going to be like, what on earth is this? And we always believed that people were going to connect to it because it was connecting to us. And that's ultimately the litmus test is ourselves. We go
Mm.
like, oh my God, this makes me feel so good. I feel like if people get it, I get it. If they get it and they feel how I feel right now, it's going to be potentially a transformative experience for them. And I think that, you know, not, of course, not 100%, but I think overall it kind of that's what bore out. I can't count how many people I've heard from who they said that like their Christmas of that year during the height of the pandemic, mind you, everyone's locked down. And so many people I've heard from who said like that was their Christmas movie for them and their family
It
was
was.
Soul. And that really means a lot, especially since our guiding light when we were working on the film, we would talk about movies that elicited feelings and made us think the way we wanted to have this movie make people think and make people feel. And one of our guiding lights was It's a Wonderful Life, you know, which interestingly enough has become a great holiday movie.
Mhm.
So again, Soul was initially supposed to come out in June. This is before the pandemic. So it was supposed to be a summer movie. And again, you talk about weird timing and fate.
Yeah.
It gets delayed, it gets pushed to Thanksgiving, then it gets pushed to Christmas. And our guiding light was like what's acknowledged as one of like the all-time great holiday movies. And then we find ourselves being a holiday movie where it's kind of like everyone's assessing and trying to appreciate what they have around them. And it feels like we've almost made this love letter to that idea. And none of that was on purpose. The timing is
Wow.
totally out of our control.
Wow. That is amazing. What was it like having, because you had a virtual movie opening?
Yeah, I
Probably.
mean, honestly, the openings, every opening we did and every event we did, I was sitting in this exact spot.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
sitting right here. I was sitting right here. So people are probably going to get bored of seeing my art books behind my head from like everything. But this is actually where I was sitting the whole time. I would put on a nice shirt, put on a suit or something like that,
Uh-huh.
sit in this spot, and this kind of, you know, we never had an official opening for Soul.
Right.
Never had a theatrical. We never had any of those things. But I tell you though, I still feel like we were so lucky. We got the movie done and we got the movie out and audiences got to experience it. So it's not even something I lament. It's not like, oh, well, I didn't get to, it's like, no, I'm thrilled that the movie got out and people got to see it and they got to enjoy it. That's why you ultimately do this thing. Every movie that gets made is a miracle. Then the second miracle is getting people to watch it.
Right.
Like that's because there's a lot of stuff that comes out that people largely don't see. And the fact that we had these double miracles during a time of pandemic, I mean, I got nothing but appreciation for how it all went down.
Indeed. I'm so intrigued by how you managed it all with One Night in Miami and then Soul.
And that's
Wow.
another weird thing. If not for the pandemic, I probably couldn't have, but it was because it was lockdown. We weren't traveling. Normally for promotional tours, I would have been having to like make a choice, either
Right.
travel here for Seoul or travel here for One Night in Miami. Because there was no travel, I just had very long days where it would be the whole day doing interviews and talking and promoting both every day for months. So, you know, at 6 in the morning, I'd be doing a press conference with people in Italy for the Venice Film Festival for One Night in Miami. Then at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m., I'd be doing an interview with someone about Soul. So it was difficult, but the only reason it was even possible is because no one was traveling. So I
Right.
was able to be there and help promote and talk about and be one of the spokespeople along with everyone else for both of those movies at the same time.
Yeah. Now, do you think I would love to see a Soul 2? Is it
Uh, I don't know
any
about.
talks of
I mean,
that?
yeah. I mean, there's no plans for anything like that right now. But I
Maybe one of
don't
his students grows up
know.
and he'll get
I mean,
a
you'll have to get back to me or get back to Pete in a few years, I would say, because yeah, it's one of those things where I kind of like our I like that we didn't try to answer every question. Um
right.
and we discussed it. We did talk a lot about like should we had versions even where we showed 22 and where she went. We had all these different versions, and every time we made a choice for the audience about that, it felt not right. It felt
Mm,
not right. It felt like the kind of thing where you really want to let the person watching it fill in that
good
part.
points.
You know,
Yeah.
when we would show Joe a year later, that didn't feel right. It was like, let's have the person watching this decide what he does after he takes that final deep breath and goes back out into the world. And that'll be the right thing for them.
Yeah. So, in other words, we'll see. There's a cliffhanger.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll see what happens.
yeah.
But in the meantime, you're on to Spider-Man and not only directing, the one that's coming out in 2023, but there's another after that.
Mhm.
And I just want to talk about how I'm sure that feels full circle because you grew up a Marvel fan.
Yeah.
How, tell me, let me into your mind. How are you feeling about, you know, working with this movie, Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse?
Well, I mean, the first Into the Spider-Verse kind of blew my mind. I mean, I wasn't even planning to jump right back into another big animated feature after Soul, because Soul took a lot out of me. It was exhausting for years. Animated movies take years. So initially I was like, okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of a break. But then I met Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who were the producers of the first film. And I didn't even know what they were planning on doing with a second film.
Mm,
So we hit it off. They asked me to come on board, and I got to say, like, I just love not just what they did with the film, but I love the Miles Morales character and his family so much that I thought, like, oh man, this is a if I can kind of help carry the weight of this story and
yeah.
kind of move it along to someplace new, which is what we're trying to do. I, I mean, I don't like to throw out words like responsibility, but I felt like it would almost be irresponsible to not at least
Mhm.
try to do that, because I know how much this character means to so many people, and I know how much the character means to younger people and adults that I know who it was just like they really leaned in on the first one so much. So it's as with Soul, I mean, making animated features is hard work, and the burden of expectation is so high, and you want to surprise people. So just like before, I'm always trying to put like my best foot forward, put my best ideas on the table, and it's not just about what's sound structurally, it's
Mhm.
how is this making me feel. I always kind of go back to that because that never really steers me
That's
wrong.
important.
It's like, how does this make me feel when I see the journey of this Miles character who's a little bit older, like in the first film, he he was at a certain transformative stage in his life. Now it's like he's a year and a half older. He's gone through this growth spurt. He's really looking like a young man now. And
Yeah.
there's all the challenges that brings with it, all the insecurities. And there are things that I remember from enduring them myself, but there are also things that I've seen in my own kids. So it's really, again, I always have lots of great personal references that I like to bring to these things. And once again, I'm back in New York and literally in Brooklyn this time,
Oh, wow.
because Miles is like Brooklyn all the way. So that's been really fun, is to explore a different version of New York than the
Yeah.
version that we did in Seoul. But it's great. It's been great.
Yeah. And your perspective is just so important. And it leads me to this question, with you being from what I read, the first African American, co-director in Pixar's history.
Yeah.
How do you envision Hollywood, specifically in animation? What would you like to see? A few things in the way of diversification. Um, what would make you feel like, all right, me being the first, I feel like, I did it because of this.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is I didn't know I was the first. Someone else told me, and I was like, "Well, that can't be right." And I was like, "Oh, wow!" Like it really kind of caught me off guard because I never thought that that would have been a possibility. But the good thing is, a lot of those things are already happening. Like being a part of this community, and knowing a lot of other Black directors and writers and the projects they're working on. It's always been like a pipeline issue, right? Like the job that I'm doing right now, that if you want to call it a job, it's more than a job. What I do for my living. When I was a young person, I didn't know this was a thing you could do for a living. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? So it's like you can't get people going down into the getting people into the pipeline if they don't even know it's a possibility.
They don't know their options.
If you don't know this is a thing people do, an achievable thing that people do, then you just don't even go through the door. So that's been my thing, is that like making young people aware that this is a door you can walk through is half the battle, because it's not going to ignite the passions and imaginations and excitement of every person, but the ones that it does excite their imagination, some of them are going to lock onto it. And that's really what you need to do to even have a chance of succeeding.
Mhm.
This isn't a world, this isn't an environment that for every job there's 10,000 qualified people who want to do it. So
Yeah.
the thing that helps you rise above the rest, it's a combination of talent, luck, but mostly perseverance. Feeling like this is the only thing I can do, and I'm the best at doing it. It's not the only similarity, the closest similarity I could say is the mentality it takes of people who are pursuing pro sports. You know what I mean? Because you can be really talented, but the odds are still like completely against
Right.
you, and it almost feels unrealistic to everyone around you to be chasing down this dream. And that's kind of Hollywood. But that being said, the wonderful thing that they don't tell you is it's not just about like winning a lottery. There's so many different kinds of jobs that prepare you to step up into the director's chair. You know what I mean? Like most animation directors at Pixar and a lot of places come from the ranks of storyboard artists. So if you're a
Mhm.
really good artist, I mean, we've hired people. Now that I think about it, we found storyboard artists on our current film from just seeing their drawings on social media, saying like, "Oh, there's a really talented person. We should meet that person." And we meet them, and they've ended up hired. And so
Wow.
it's just one of those things where the end result feels like this mountain that no one can accomplish, but the journey to getting there is actually quite accessible. But people just have to be aware that it's a possible thing. Of course, art
And how do you
schools in
do
America.
that is
What's
the
that?
thing. How do you do that is the thing. How do you?
Well, I think seeing people like me at least piques people's curiosity. It's about outreach to students. I think that's a big deal. And I've participated in a lot of student outreach as well as a lot of my peers. And a lot of these organizations reach out and do outreach to students. And I think we're already seeing the results. I mean, it's cool. Like Soul was really well received. And for many people, I became um the black face of that project. But the reality is I was far from the only black person involved in Soul. It wasn't like making Soul was me and then all white people. No, no, no. We had black story artists, we had black animators, we had black designers, we had a black executive producer. The it's already the difference is noticeable, because and that's why we had an internal culture and story trust, because all these people involved, we would get together and have conversations as a group. about
Yeah.
the film and the work and on the different departments and the things that we were doing. So that was part of the what gave me so much encouragement, was that so many of the people below the line and so many of the people in different departments, I don't want to pretend like it was predominantly Black, but there were Black faces all over the place. And their voices were heard. And some of those voices, I can't say specifically which one, but some of them are now in the process of directing their own films.
Wow.
More than one, like several of the people who were involved in Soul as story artists or animators are actually directing their own films, not just at Pixar, but at other places. So that's all it really is just supporting people, getting them into the pipeline, piquing their curiosity, get them into the pipeline, help them get the experience, and then it moves up.
That's amazing. And that is really just the gift that's going to keep on giving for
I
me.
think so. I really think so. I am, if I was the first, then I'm far from the last. There's a lot of people who have some amazing stuff in the
That's
pipeline, and I
awesome.
can't wait to see all of it.
What do your children want to follow in your footsteps? Are
No,
they creative as well? No.
they're creative in their own way, but neither of them seems to have any interest in doing what I do.
Okay.
My daughter's 24. She's a publicist.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yes, and my
But still a
son.
writer, you know.
Yeah, there's a writing element to it,
Yeah.
but she does like brands and stuff like that, like Nintendo and stuff. So not Hollywood related.
Nice.
And my son is going into college to major in sociology. So
Oh, interesting.
yes, so as of right now, they don't seem to really want to do what I do, but who knows what the future holds. But if they decide they want to make a turn, I'm here to give advice and help out in any way that I can.
Indeed. And bolster their passions.
Yes,
So that's
absolutely.
awesome. You've been a living example of what it means to follow
Thank
a
you.
dream. So thank you for all of your work for Soul. Soul touched so many lives, and it's been so successful at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem that we've extended the
I'm so
exhibit so
well.
that
I'm
people
gonna
can
come
be
check it
seen.
out in
Yeah,
October. I'll check it
in
out in
October.
October. Yes, I'll be there in October, so I'll check it out then.
Oh, well, I hope to meet you
Yeah.
then.
Well, if you're around, I'll be there.
Cool. Kemp Powers, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate this, and I appreciate meeting you so much. This has been very inspiring.
Same here. Same here. Great.
All right, take care.
Take care.